for the Wooliver family reunion. Wooliver is my grandmother's maiden name. And this year was especially exciting because I had secured special lodging. The log cabin in the woods above my great uncle's house. You see, my grandmother's brother, my Uncle Jerry, spent many years slowly but surely, log by log and stone by stone, moving and rebuilding a log cabin that belonged to my great-great-great-grandmother.
Wow.
He marked each individual log so he knew their placement and moved them one by one to the cabin's new site in the woods above his house.
Wow.
And on this trip, it was agreed that Alex and I would get to stay in the cabin. When we got there, I remember my uncle leaning on a worn wooden doorpost on the front porch of the cabin. And he said, lovingly, and I would mimic his accent here, but I can't do it well. Esther, can you imagine that all of our Wooliver ancestors have leaned on this doorpost just like I am right now? Isn't it special to be in a place you know your ancestors have touched? And it was special to stand in that place, to touch that doorpost, to stay in the one room of the cabin where my great-great-great-grandmother had lived and cooked her meals and experienced what she called visions. I want to ask us today to consider our ancestors. And when I use the word ancestor, I mean a person or a being in this world whose presence here helped craft and shape our presence here. Ancestors can be ancestors of body through biology, or ancestors of spirit and social identity and heart. You don't have to be closely related to someone to connect with them as an ancestor, and you don't need to be a parent to become an ancestor. Again, they can be our biological kindred, but they can also be single-celled organisms, plants, even very ancient beings like Neanderthals and Denisovans. I wonder, how much time do you spend thinking about your ancestors? Where they came from, what were their lives like, what ways of being they began in this world that you are now completing. I'd like to introduce a concept called ancestral reverence and think about how we might relate to practices of ancestral reverence as Unitarian Universalists. Now you may be wondering, what on earth is ancestral reverence? You may be thinking, it sounds woo-woo to me. I don't know about all that. And I'll tell you, I was skeptical the first time I heard of this too. I'll tell you some of what I've learned, and then you can decide for yourselves what exactly you make of it. I understand ancestral reverence practices to be a way of connecting to our spiritual lineages and legacies. Both the legacies of those who have come before us, the legacies that are alive in us right now, and legacies we will leave for those who come after. It can be a practice of honoring our ancestors spiritually, of connecting with them historically, or of recognizing generational patterns. It can be a way of honoring and celebrating where we've come from, and a way of being intentional about where we are and where we want to go. Ancestral reverence practices generally spring from the belief that the wisdom of our loving and liberated ancestors, whether of physical body or social identity or spirit, that their wisdom is available to us even after they've transitioned into death. Now I know when we think about ancestors and what wisdom they might have to offer us, some of them are very easy to contemplate because we know they were loving people who worked to make this world a better place. And as I just named, I like to refer to these ancestors as loving and liberated. I like to use that because it references those who were characterized by bringing compassion and care and freedom to their relationships with others and this world. And we know that some of our ancestors are more complicated because they didn't always treat others with compassion, kindness, justice, or love. Some of them were just bad news. And it can be hard to think about these ancestors, to hold their memories in our minds and hearts and bodies. It's difficult to know how to relate to those who came before us when we know they lived complex lives and in some cases did very harmful things. And we may begin to feel a little defensive thinking about this. We may think, what do you mean I'm a descendant of colonizers? Or what do you mean my ancestors were sexist or racist or emotionally manipulative? We may think, I'm living in the present in 2023 and I didn't do any of those things, so they're not my responsibility. Or we may think, none of my ancestors are people I want to connect with. I've certainly thought some of these things at various points in my life. And I have good news, I hope. Although I believe it's important to reflect on and process the harmful things our ancestors have done, we don't have to set an intention to connect directly with those people. All I think we're called to do is reflect on how we can transform cycles of harm into cycles of healing. That is how we become wise, loving, and liberated ancestors ourselves. As we prepared for this service, Kalenia sent me some statistics that blew my mind. These statistics ask this question: how many grandparents do I have? And it was answered in this way. We're going to go through many generations here. Parents, 2. Grandparents, 4. Great-grandparents, 8. Second great-grandparents, 16. Third great-grandparents, 32. Fourth great-grandparents, 64. Fifth great-grandparents, 128. Sixth, 256. Seventh, oh, y'all are good at math. 512. Eighth, 1,024. Ninth, 2,048. And 10th great-grandparents, 4,096. Wow. I'm mind blown that some of you could just do that in your minds. Way beyond me.
Too many programmers.
These numbers give me hope that for each of us, someone somewhere in there is bound to be worth connecting with. Someone somewhere in there, bound to be worth it. And again, ancestors don't have to be ancestors of biology. We can also connect with thinkers and artists and musicians and social activists and so many more. I've learned from indigenous frameworks to begin to pay careful attention to intergenerational relationships. Many indigenous ways of understanding the world teach us to think not just about the present-day impacts of our current actions, but also how our actions and choices will impact the world 7 generations from now. And this encourages us to ask, what did my ancestors 7 generations ago do that impacts me right now? And how will what I am doing now affect those who come after me? Disability activist Stacey Park Milburn, who became an ancestor in 2020, wrote something I want to share today. Stacey wrote, quote, "I believe our ancestors laugh, cry, hurt, rage, and celebrate with us. More importantly, I believe they learn as we are learning, just as we learn from them. We grow knowledge and movements with them. We demand and entice the world to change the way things have always been done with them. We change ourselves with them, and they learn through us. when we become ancestors, we will also continue to learn. What a beautiful way of thinking about how we can be in relationship with our ancestors. We can imagine them learning with us, and this suggests a dynamic aliveness to our relationships with those who come before us and those who will come after. A need to be present in this moment so we can learn together. To be a loving and liberated descendant and an ancestor to be means paying attention to what is happening now, locally and globally. And I'm going to talk about something hard now that may be hard to hear because it was hard for me to write, and I think will be hard for me to speak. But I think it's important for us to hold it together. I can't talk about ancestors and descendants in this moment without being so conscious that due to all the wars in so many places in our world, entire families are being lost. Entire generations of wisdom and life experiences obliterated. So many lives that were offering art and thought and love to this world are gone. As you use, we covenant to affirm the worth and dignity of every life. That means the people we understand and like and find it easy to empathize with. And it means the people we don't understand and don't like and find it impossible to empathize with. As you use, we hold this paradox as holy. We covenant to work for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations with the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. We covenant to respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we know we are a part. To truly live into these values is what will help us become loving and liberated ancestors. And right now, I believe that our UU covenant with each other calls us to remember the impacts of war on our planet, on lives now, and 7 generations from now. These values call us to hold complicated truths and histories, to hold paradoxes, to not turn away from the ways we might alleviate suffering and affirm the worth of every life, whether that is in Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Palestine, Israel, or here in the United States. Right now, my UU and Jewish values call me to affirm the preciousness of Jewish life, lost and threatened, and also the preciousness of Palestinian life, lost and threatened. This moment calls us to consider how we want to be remembered, what we hope our lineages and legacies will be. Will they be legacies of peace, liberty, and justice for all? Or will we, in staying silent or afraid to act or just plain burned out, bequeath more wars, more injustice, more shrinking of liberties? Friends, the choice is ours. And it can be hard to know how to move forward in times like this. This week I found myself going to my ancestor altar many times and asking, how did you do it? How did you live through the great griefs and challenges of your time? One way I increasingly make it through these times is asking my ancestors for guidance, believing I can learn with them and they with me. My own practices of ancestral reverence give me great spiritual and emotional resource during this time. And I know for some of us this may be easy to contemplate. But for others, it may seem far-fetched or distant from our own experience or just difficult to think about. And if that's you, I want to let you know you're not alone in feeling doubt or discomfort. When I first started learning about building relationship with my ancestors in grad school, I thought, what can they do for me? At the time, I identified most strongly as a humanist UU. I didn't pray. I felt disconnected from what I now call the more than human world. And I had no idea how to begin to connect with my ancestors. So I want to offer you a lens that springs from the creativity brought on by my own doubt. I think of it as a humanist-influenced practice for thinking about our relationships to ancestors and how we can transform ourselves and the world. When I first tried to find a way to relate to these practices, I was also in an intense time of learning about the concept of embodiment. It occurred to me that though I still had many questions and uncertainties, I loved and was awed by many things about our scientific knowledge about human bodies. It occurred to me that the lives and physical legacies of my ancestors are present in my body. Legacies of epigenetic intergenerational trauma and healing. I became fascinated by the fact that my mitochondrial DNA has genetic information linking me to ancestors who lived in the way distant past, that in some way they're still alive in me. I noticed how my body and my appearance are so similar to my grandmother's and my great-grandparents and great-aunts. I thought about the ways that patterns of behavior tend to cycle through generations and families, patterns that can be generative or harmful. And I felt all of these connected me to my ancestors in a very tangible way. And so I might connect with them more by connecting with my own body in the present moment. And that's what I want to invite us into right now in a time of ritual. Just to try it on and see what happens. And I invite you to begin by just orienting to your body and breath in the ways you find easeful. Wiggle around, stand up if you need to, do whatever works for you. And when you find yourself attuned to your body and your breath, start noticing the many layers of you. Your limbs, your torso, your legs, your neck, your head, your skin, and all the things beneath your skin. Your bones and muscles and blood vessels and organs, nervous systems. Notice how they all work together to support you right now. And after you've spent a little time there, notice even smaller elements of your body. Bacteria and microbes, viruses, cells. Notice how all of these things are playing a part in supporting you, sometimes in surprising ways. Marvel at the complexity of your genes and their expressions, knowing that your DNA connects you to many ancestors going back hundreds and thousands of years. Remember how ancient evolution connects you to the more than human world. How you, alive and present in this moment, are the result of so many ages of ancestral connection and evolution and changes. Know that you are a link to the past, the present, and the future. Your body, your mind, your spirit connect you to your ancestors, those of kin and those of heart. Their patterns and decisions influence you just as yours will influence those who come after. And take a moment to imagine the ways which your presence in this world is going to ripple out to impact others beyond this lifetime. What kind of ancestor do you want to be? And wind down your time of attunement, perhaps offering gratitude to the memory of your ancestors that is alive in your bones and your spirit. As you return to this space and this time, at your own pace, in your own rhythm, you may remember that this week's sermon announcement invited you to bring an object or photograph that represents your ancestors. When you're done, if you remembered, you're invited to come up and place your object here on this ancestor altar. And we're going to do this again next week. So if you didn't remember, you can practice by coming up and bringing what's in your heart just to the altar. Maybe murmuring your ancestors' names out loud and speaking into the room your intention of what kind of ancestor you want to become. And I will start us off in this practice. This is from my grandmother, Alice Mildred Wooliver Paris. And I remember her and her love, and I want to become an ancestor who is remembered for offering love to the world.
This is our former dog Gibby, who we consider one of our ancestors. You can't hear me? I'll just try to really project. This is our dog Gibby. He is an ancestor of ours, and he brought sweetness and delight into the world, even though he was blind and couldn't see where he was going. And he was just a really special and loving presence in our mind. And it reminds me to try to bring love into every space.
You're right. What is that? The bridge?
I don't, I forgot, I didn't know. And,
All good.
I want to bring my grandmother, Hermina, I'm not sure what her last name was, but my sisters and I gathered family pictures and spent 4 days going through them, and then we scanned some to make a book for our children and future generations. And so I have this lovely picture of Hermina hanging on my wall now with her violin. So that's what I
Go ahead. It would take me a bit to get down the stairs.
I'll meet you in the middle.
Oh.
Grandparents. I have a special sort of connection to this particular brand. My grandmother had a deck of cards that my grandfather played in France during the First World War.
Oh, wow.
And she taught me how to play poker. She was very German, and the roots in my German family in Chicago kind of go deep in community, so I'm glad I'm part of that.
I want to share. My grandmother is with us all the time, with me all the time. She passed away when I was about 6 or 7, I think it was. And my mother didn't let me go to the funeral. I thought I could handle it, but my mother said no. And I said, why? She said, well, Mama Vera is now dust. I interpreted that as dust. She's gone back to the earth and dust to dust. So every time I see light, a shaft of light, and I see dust, I think of my grandmother, Mama Vera.
I'm remembering my grandfather, Leslie Davis, who was the ambassador to Poland during World War II, and he, with his assistant, helped at least 40 people get passage to America who were Jewish, and he kept their money because they couldn't risk taking that with them, and all came to the United States. He ended up living in New York. When he died, he only had 30 cents left. He hadn't found the family that had that money. So my sister, a different sister from a different father, she was like 10 or 12 before she really understood why every Christmas they got a case of oranges from Southern California. That was one of the families. So I honor Leslie Davis.
Lately, I've been asked in multiple places, not just this morning, to remember my dad, Clifford Lee Fleming Jr. And neither one of us, he nor I, ever knew Clifford Lee Fleming Sr. Although we had this family story that his name is on the Brickyard. He drove an Indianapolis 500, which must have been like in the 30s. My dad had a tattoo that said "Born for Speed," and he told me it was one of his biggest regrets that he had that tattoo. I find it very interesting that I'm remembering him in church, because he was the kind of person who believed that church would fall down if he came in. And I think he would have fit right in Lake County, because one legacy thing he told us was that we came from a long line of Irish heathens. So I'm remembering him today.
Well, I have a really different idea about my ancestors, because I had my DNA done by National Geographic, and it came back 100% Jewish, which is really pretty unusual, which means that my ancestors all the way back were never mixed with anything but other Jews. So that's a real interesting fact I thought I'd share with you.
Okay, I gotta admit this about my background. It's my mother. She severely abused me since I was a baby infant. She abandoned me and my dad's second mother's lawn in Gustine, Central Valley, when I was 4. she made sure I didn't eat, she ate. The most abusive childhood, most traumatic childhood anybody can have. And then, sorry, and then when my dad Samara took me in, my Samara started whipping me with a belt over my body, like when I was 5 years old. Anything I did wrong, I've always been whipped over my body. It doesn't matter where she whipped me. I learned to, lie on my side and cover my ears, because when the belt hits my ears, it just hurts so bad, because the cartilage is the worst thing to hit on is the ears. It's so painful. And so I learned to cut my ears while she beat me. And then she died when I was 10. And then had babysitters. Sorry. My dad neglected me and stuff, and then he sent me away as 14, very abusive foster homes, and out there for foster homes forever. I got back home to Dad in, around February 71, I was 16. Then I turned 17 on April Fool's Day, my birthday. Yeah, and then he sent me away again, abusive foster homes, November of 71. And then in 72, my dad sold a house in Gustine, in Central Valley, Merced County. And then my dad's family is from Lake County here since middle or 1800s. So I know both my great grandparents on his side, somewhere back east, two different families came to Lake County, covered wagon, and let's see here. And then I was the most abusive foster. Again, it's just beyond belief of what abuse I've been through in a foster home in Clovis. It was so. I was there for 9 months. A social worker got me out, and I sent boys home in Fresno, and I just lived up and down Central Valley, all these abusive places, and then I was sent back home to Dad. This time, my dad lived in Collect Highlands. And so, excuse me. And then I almost gotten killed. So my dad,
We are holding you in our hearts.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes.
I want to make sure that anybody else who would like to share has time.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hold you in our
It's
hearts.
a long story. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to remember my grandparents. Elizabeth Lank was my grandmother. We called her Mama Liz, and my grandpa was Herman Short. And they lived at the shore, and there were 5 of us who my mom would drive us down in an old 54 before seatbelts and take the seat out of the back, and we would all play games down the bottom, and we lived to tell the tale. But it was a very blessed childhood, because we really, when we went there, we were free to just go to the beach. We often camped they had a farm, we camped outside. My grandfather, one of the things he did since we were real little is I realize in hindsight, we whitewashed one fence. Every time we went there, we whitewashed it. And we loved doing it. We would wear these little painter things. So I have a lot of gratitude for them and all they did. Thank you.
Oh, Dennis, yes.
Just bringing it from my heart to this, your memories of my Aunt Helen, my mother's oldest sister, who taught me how to make cheesecake. And when I was in seminary, I made a pastoral call to the hospital where she was dying of cancer. That was the first pastoral visit I made. And and with love, and most of all, I bring Thanksgiving for this ancestor because she's the only person who ever said maybe I should go to